So, hi everyone, quick intro from my side. Arun Santhosh, I'm a principal solution architect specializing in QuickSight. Been with the product for 4.5+ years, and overall I have 20+ years of experience, mostly in the BI space. So, happy to talk to all of you today. And as Maitri mentioned, in today's session, we will be focusing on the QuickSight controls and filters and control capabilities. As there is really just two things that we will cover here. One, we will look at what that old state was, how this used to work before. I will sort of replicate that scenario as best as possible with the current QuickSight features, sort of to mimic the old state. We'll point out the deficiencies that we had in there, and then we will get into the improvements that were made and how that makes the authoring experience much more easier and streamlined. So really that's the only slide I will be showing you. I'll take over the control now, and then we will do a hands-on demo here. Okay, so let's get started. In terms of the older state of things, with our filters, we used to have 4 different filter scopes defined. That's visuals, some visuals, all visuals from a data set, and all applicable visuals. Those were the 4 that were available to us. So sort of to show what that looks like, let's start by creating this new analysis. This is just based on our SaaS sales sample data set. And I have a duplicate copy of that as well brought in here. But right now, let's start on SaaS sales. I'm just going to create a visual here with product, segment, and sales. And let's make this horizontal stacked bar chart. Let's switch over this product and segment. Oops. Let's go here, add this again. It sort of dropped it outside there and lost the fields. So let's add that back here. And now I have this horizontal stacked bar chart. Let's just sort it by product as well, so it's easy to understand what products are filtered out and what's still there. So now let's go in here on product and add a filter for this field. You can see that the filter gets added, and straight off the bat, if you have used QuickSight in the past, you would notice that the scope is being called out here as a badge now, which says only this visual. Earlier, we used to have a 4-tile icon with different tiles filled in, which sort of represented this scope. If one tile was filled in, it would mean that it's applied only to one visual. If a couple of tiles, then some of the visuals. And if all tiles were filled, it's all applicable visuals. It was a little bit difficult to interpret. So this makes it easier. That's part of the new feature, but I'll still try to paint the old picture first, right? So in here, let's go and add a control to top of this sheet. So we have a filter, we have the filter control added. And now let's just make sure it works, right? So I took out Alchemy from this product list, and you can see, of course, Alchemy has gone off from the visual here. So that filter is working. Let's put this back to select all state. And now I'm going to just duplicate this visual, duplicate the full sheet. So of course, on the new sheet, I got my visual, I got my filter. The filter still works, right? So I was able to take out Alchemy. That's filtered out now. But now if I return back to my original sheet, you will see that here I still see Alchemy, and here the product control still shows me all the products in there, and it's in select all state. So this sort of was a pain point before when you wanted to go across sheets and you were using the inbuilt filters and filter control capabilities, directly adding the filter control from the filter itself, you had this trouble of linking these filters across sheets. Now, of course, you could make this work using parameters. So for that, we will just look at that as well. That used to be the workaround before. So I'm just going to delete this duplicate sheet here, go back to this original sheet. I'll just play with this control. And let's go in the parameter route and see how that used to work. So for that, I'm going into parameter section here and adding a new parameter for product. Let's just call it as P product for denoting that this is a parameter and distinguishing it from the actual field name. It's a string type. I'll make it a multi-value parameter and I'll create this here. So I do get this choice, this option of creating a control from the parameter. So I can create that, call this product, and I'll link it to our data set. This has sales data set and select from the product field. So what this does is it takes distinct values from that column and shows that as options in this control. When we added the control earlier from the filter directly, all that happened implicitly. Now, when we are using parameters, we are doing all this explicitly. And again, I am just still showing the old state of things, how things used to be. I haven't gotten to the improvements yet. So bear with me a few more minutes while I set the stage. So in here, now I have a filter, I have a parameter, I have the parameter control. I haven't linked the parameter to the filter yet, right? So I have to go into the actual filter here, click on it and change the filter type from filter list to custom filter. I have to select use parameters. And you can see that this dialog now calls out that you can do this using cross sheet filters. So for several use cases where parameters were being used, our authors are used to using parameters to apply filters cross sheet. So we are just adding this note here so that for folks who missed this session or who didn't see the new feature come out, they now get this info and can move on to the new way of doing things. But what this essentially is asking is whether we want to leave the scope at the single visual level or we want to apply this across sheets and across data sets. But for now, for purposes of this old state demo, I'm just going to click no, meaning leave the scope as only this visual. And now I'll go into here and select the parameter. P product is the parameter which we just created in the last step. Select that and apply. Right. So now let's see if this filter works. Remove alchemy from this, and you can see it went off from the visual. We'll just duplicate this sheet. And of course, on the new sheet, like before, we have the visual and we have the control. Now, earlier, when we had used the implicit control, we were not able to make changes and have that persist across sheets. Now here I took out big old database as well from the product list. Flipping back to original sheet, it's still showing me big old database here, but that's fine. That's happening because I have to explicitly make this change in the layout setting and go say reload visuals each time I switch sheets. So that if I apply that, now it should stick. So if I go in here, change, let's say, remove alchemy and big old database, go to sheet 2, you can see those two products are not there, right? I remove chatbot plugin from here, flip back to sheet 1, and that's gone from here as well. So this is how we could make it work earlier. As you can see, it's a little bit of extra work. You have to have that parameter in the mix. You have to have those controls created. And you could still make it work. But the amount of effort that you needed to put in was sort of amplified when let's say you were working on a big dashboard and you had like 10 sheets with 5 controls each. You could, of course, if you knew ahead of time that you needed those 5 controls, you could create that initial sheet with those 5 controls and then duplicate from there and change the other visuals as needed for the additional sheets. So the controls would carry over. So that's what our authors used to do as well. But let's say as part of an enhancement project, you had the requirement to add an additional 5 filters onto each of these 10 sheets. Now that's 50 filter controls that you got to put on these sheets, and there was no easy way to do that. So that was painful for our authors, and we have taken that feedback and we have sort of improved that whole experience with the new cross sheet capabilities. And overall, the filter scopes and the filter controls, that entire experience has become much better, right? So now we can take a look at that experience. And before I get to that, let me just reset our state here. So I'll just delete this duplicate sheet. Now let's just delete these controls as well. Let's go into the filter, remove the filter too. Right. So we are back to square one. I just have one sheet. I just have one visual in here. And I'm going to create some copies of this. Right. So let's create a copy of this visual, but maybe before I do that, I will change the properties a little bit. Let's say I get rid of the data zoom bar. Let's it's sorted by alchemy. So that looks good. So let's say I duplicate this visual and duplicate it one more time. And I'll just shift over to SAS Sales 2 here, and I will add one more visual. Just to distinguish between these, let's say we bring it in as a vertical stack bar this time, and we will bring the same dimension fields here. So product, segment, and sales. So you can, let's change this to fit to width so we can see everything. Let's also change the title of these. I'll call this visual 1 through 4. We can easily refer to this. So here visuals 1 through 3 are from the SAS sales dataset, and visual 4, which is the vertical stack bar chart, that's from SAS sales 2. Okay. So and in here, now let's add the product filter again. I have visual 1 selected, and I'm going to click on product and say add filter for this field. So you can see added it, and by default it's adding it only for this visual. Let's also add this control to top of this sheet. Now let's go in here or expand this filter control, filter definition, and let's look at the scoping a little bit. So by default, you will see that this scope tile is there up top. This is new. And by default, it's applied to that single visual which we had selected while creating that particular filter. And we do have the option to do a sheet or cross sheet. But before we do that, let's remove alchemy from this list and see what happens. So only this visual is impacted, which is what we expected, right? Because the scope is only this visual for this filter. These were duplicate, but the filters are not applied on those visuals. So we don't see alchemy being removed. And of course, visual 4 is coming from a different data set altogether. Let's also sort this in ascending order so that we can see alchemy up top and verify that it's indeed not filtered out. Now, clicking that first visual, going back to filters, let's change this to the entire sheet. So now you can see that visuals 1, 2, and 3, the alchemy product has been filtered out of those, versus in visual 4, we still show alchemy because the full sheet scope still doesn't cover cross data sets. And that control is exposed as a checkbox option for us now here. So as we click into this, you can see that now alchemy has been filtered out from visual 4. Right? So, and we also get to see that the cross data set is being applied to 2 data sets. And if you click on the field mapping, it shows which all are the matching fields across these 2 data sets. In this particular demo, I just have a duplicate version of SaaS sales, so obviously I'm getting match on all the columns therein. But let's say you had a completely different data set and product field happened to be there in that data set as well, then it would latch on and find that match on that product field, and it would still filter on that product field. And this screen, the field mapping screen, has been available in the product from before. So that's not new, just that how we expose it as this apply cross data set option is exposed as a checkbox here and much more easier to interpret and understand. So in here, we also have the option of applying it to select visuals, similar to the sum visual scope in the older days, right? So if you click on this sheet, all visuals, it sort of expands out here to this menu, and you see the option for custom select visuals. So if I enable this custom select, then I get to choose which visuals to apply this on, which visuals not to apply that filter on. So let's say I do not want it applied on visual 2, deselect visual 2 from here and update. And you can see now that alchemy shows up here. So the filter is now being applied to visuals 1, 3, and 4 and not to visual 2. And you can always go back and reset it either by selecting the checkbox or just by clicking that toggle control off. And now it again is applied to all 4 visuals. Okay. So now let's look at the cross sheet capabilities. So as I did before, I'm just going to click on sheet 1. I'm just going to duplicate this. I'll duplicate this one more time maybe. And let's rename this as well. Let's call this sheets 2 and 3. So it's easy to refer to. Okay, so flipping back to sheet 1, I have the original visual selected. Let's go back and look at the filter state. You can see that even though we had left that filter in single sheet mode, as we duplicated that sheet, it automatically extended it and it sort of applied cross sheet scope there for that filter because we are duplicating the full sheet. So QuickSight knows that everything that was working on this sheet is sort of needed on that new duplicate, and that includes filters and controls, right? So and then as we flip into sheet 2 and sheet 3, we see the same product filter being available there. Now, this had happened in the older QuickSight versions as well. You could duplicate, and the filter and control came with it, as I showed initially. Just that as you went in and applied and made changes to those controls, those would be just restricted to this sheet on which you were making those changes. So that's what's different here. So if I'm on sheet 2 and I say I want to see all the products, now you can see, of course, Alchemy came back within this sheet, but as I go into other sheets, you can see the product comes up there as well, right? So even though I made the change on sheet 2, it's available in sheet 3 and sheet 1. And likewise, if I take it out from here, it's removed from all the other sheets. So now this is super easy, right? So if you have to work with multiple sheets, either if the sheets are already there or you're creating new sheets, it becomes very easy to add a filter and apply it across sheets. And you also saw that as you add new sheets, it's sort of automatically applying the same filters onto those new sheets as well. Now, there is, of course, more options to customize. As we did with visuals, if we click on this cross sheet, we do get this option wherein all the sheets are being shown, and we could custom select the sheets. So if I wanted the same set of filters applied to both sheet 1 and sheet 2, but not to sheet 3, I could just remove sheet 3 from there and update. And QuickSight sort of wants me, saying the filter change affects the filter controls added to the sheets, sort of telling you that this could impact what's being displayed on your sheets. I'm good with that. I click continue. And now if we go into sheet 2, obviously that has got the filter still applied. It still has the control. And we go to sheet 3, you can see none of these visuals are filtered. Also, the filter control has been automatically removed from here, right? So it's super easy to control this. Let's go back in here and toggle this off again. And when you toggle off that custom sheet selection, you're again being asked whether you want to add that filter control to the top of one sheet where QuickSight will add filters now. Because meaning earlier sheet 3 didn't have filters, you're turning off custom selection, which means it has to be applied to all 3 sheets. So sheet 3 is now getting this filtering done. Do you want to show the filter control up top on that sheet? So if you select this checkbox and continue, then both filter and control will be applied. If you do not select this checkbox and continue, then only the filter will be applied. The control will not show up on sheet 3, right? So let's select this and continue. Going on to sheet 3, now you can see filter is applied, Alchemy is filtered out, and I do have the filter control up top. So all that is good. Now let's see this scenario where we end up having to add a new filter. Sort of the problem state, the most painful scenario that I called out earlier, right? Where you have a ton of sheets and you have to add, say, 5, 10, 15 new filter controls across all these sheets. So let's mimic that scenario. Coming back to sheet 1, I'm just going to click on segment and say add filter for this field. And by default, it's applying only to that particular visual. I can go in here and say add control, add to the top of this sheet. And note that I just have these 2 options here, right? Top of this sheet or inside the sheet. Let's do top of the sheet, and segment comes in here. It, of course, filters only that one visual now. And now let's go in and change the scope to cross sheet. And again, like when we turned off that custom sheet selection, it's asking us whether you want this filter control to be automatically added on top of the 2 additional sheets, which are being included in the filter scope now, right? So let's say this time we saw the experience when we enabled this checkbox last time. So this time around, let's go ahead without enabling that. I'll just click continue. So if I go to sheet 2 and sheet 3, I shouldn't see the control up top for segment, right? But it should still let me filter it from here. So if I come back to sheet 1 and let's say take out SMB from here, it shows me only 2 segments. If I go into sheet 2 and sheet 3, you can see the same filtering is being applied except for that secondary data set visual. And that's because we haven't enabled apply cross data sets here. If we do that, it will apply on that one as well. So filters applied, controls not created. But even if you decide that you want to add controls at a later state, we offer you that flexibility, and you can do it with very easy steps here now. So we can go back into that segment filter, and let's click on here. And now you see we have this manage control option, and therein we get more options, right? So we have this additional option which says add to top of all sheets in filter scope. So I can go ahead and click that, and it automatically applies the segment filter control on both my sheet 2 and sheet 3. So earlier you had to do all of this by hand. Now this is just one click within that manage control, and it automatically applies it to your 10 or 15 sheets that you have that you want this applied to. And it's not just about adding new filter controls. It's about editing as well, and also when you are adding new sheets, right? So let's see, when you're adding new sheets, when you've started a fresh sheet, you didn't even duplicate this sheet. You're adding a fresh sheet, but QuickSight sees that you have 2 filters which are set to be cross sheet filters, and its scope is all the existing sheets in there. So when you add a new sheet, by default, it gets included in the scope of those 2 filters, and those controls show up here as well. And that's super convenient, right? Now, let's go back, and we will also look at editing this, right? Because as you see, when QuickSight creates these default filter controls, it sort of starts it off with these default names. Like if it's control for the product filter, it calls it product equals, and segment filter, it calls it segment equals. And let's say you don't fancy this style, you want to change this, just say product selection and segment selection. You can very well do that. And note that I am sitting on sheet 3 here. I'm just clicking on the segment equals controls ellipse and choosing to edit it. And in here, you can see now that there are 2 sections. In this section, cross sheet setting calls out that shared control properties get auto updated across sheets. So you get a gist of what's coming, right? So you don't have to edit this in 3 places now. I can just change the title to segment selection here in one place. And let's say I also want to add an info icon against that. And I want to just call this my cross sheet control edit demo. Let's apply that. And you can see here that info icon came in, cross sheet edit demo, and the name of that filter changed to segment selection. Flipping back to sheet 2, I click on here, you can see it's segment selection, same info text, same in sheet 1. Right? So when you have 15 sheets, 10 different controls, this translates into a lot of time saving. So super easy to do this now, and a lot of power to the authors to work with really heavy dashboards with 10-15 sheets, a lot of controls. Okay, so that covers this feature pretty much, but there's one more thing I will leave you with, which is you might be thinking, hey, you showed us parameters up front, and now you showed us this new way of doing things with QuickSight scope, QuickSight filter scope. The question you might have is, does that mean parameters are no longer needed? And can parameters be no longer used? Parameters still have value. There are scenarios wherein you would still want to use parameters. Say you're using an embedded application and you want to pass some initial value for your filter based on the user who is logged in into your embedded application. You want to derive those values and pass that in to that filter to sort of set the initial state. You can still utilize parameters for those. There are a lot of other use cases as well. Say you want to use navigation actions, set some parameters, and use that parameter in turn in a filter. So parameter still stays, it's still valuable, and it's for a slightly more advanced use cases and slightly more advanced authors. The QuickSight filters and implicit filter control sort of makes it much easier for the entry level and medium level authors. And for a majority of use cases, this is what will be needed, and you can do it much easily without having to deal with parameters. Now, for the actual, if you want to use parameters, you definitely can. And you can see that in here, let's go back into this product filter. You can see even with the QuickSight scope applied, you can change the filter type to a custom filter. You can say use parameters and select the parameter product there, right? P product parameter and apply. So it sort of warns you at that stage as well that the filter control that we had added earlier, that those are the implicit filter controls, and that they will be removed because those go into disabled state because we are associating this filter to a parameter now. If you say continue, you can see as want all of those product filter controls went off from here. And now you can go on to the parameter from here and add control, right? So you would go through the same motions that I showed earlier to add the parameter specific control. Coming back to that filter, if you decide you didn't want parameters and you want to just you want to go back to the regular way of doing the things, the implicit way, you can. So I will go back in filter type, change it to filter list, select all, apply, and then I can go in here and add it back to top of all sheets. You can see it came up here. Okay, so that covers all the aspects that I wanted to highlight, and hopefully I've got a full grasp on the full feature set here, the filter scopes, as well as the improvements made in the controls, control placement, how easily you can swap it. Let's look at one more final thing. Just thought of that. So let's go in here, look at the edit option. There is this place as well where it shows you how many sheets this control is present on. So when you're editing stuff, we saw this earlier when we changed the segment selection, right? But I hadn't drilled into the details there. So we had made this change, segment selection, we had added the info text. So when we are making that change, right there, we can see that it's applied to multiple sheets. And if we click on it, it also tells us which sheets it's applied on and what the position of these filter control is on those sheets as well. So it's saying top, top, and top for all three. Let's say I change for this one to say move inside sheet and then go back here. Let's refresh this. Has to take my selection and let's go back and check this. So now the product is moved in here. Let's say I can't edit it from there. Let's go back in here and edit it. Right, so edit. And if I click here now, it shows that on sheet 1 and 2, it's on the top of the sheet, whereas sheet 3, it's on within the sheet, right? So that's also available to you. It makes it quite easy to deal with this as you're making the changes. You can quickly see where all that filter is exposed and at what level, and then decide whether you want to apply those changes or not.